Thanks for tuning in to another installment of Advanced TV Herstory, a podcast that studies, analyzes, and celebrates women in television. Thousands of comedies, variety shows, and dramas and other events have aired, yet the presence of strong women, both in front of and behind the camera, is an experience we need to understand better and embrace. With an eye to aligning the leadership lesson, time capsule observation, or fascinating backstory of a show's success or failure, my goal of Advanced TV Herstory is to connect the treasures of the past to the great potential of today's TV and online platforms. Tomorrow's success is rooted in understanding what has come before us. So gear up for a little sociology, economics, strategy, storytelling, and fun. It's all here at Advanced TV Herstory. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. To have any basic understanding of the evolution of women in TV is to know just how important the show Cagney Lacey, which aired from 1981 to 1988, was and is. This installment of Advanced TV Herstory focuses on the show's pilot, the 2 hours that, in and of themselves, changed TV for women forever. It gave women opportunities behind the camera, and its quality was such that the 2 female leads, Tyne Daly and Sharon Gless, captured the leading actress in a drama series Emmy for 6 consecutive years. Daly 1 year, Gless the next, back and forth. Year in and year out, even during a very strong time for women in TV, no other show gave women room to run like this one did. So the story of the pilot, actually the long slog of developing the premise and selling the idea, is one of resilience, vision, commitment, patience, and moxie. It was a time in Hollywood and television when white males dominated every level of decision-making. A few were looking at trends, reading the papers, and getting an earful from their wives, mothers, or daughters, but most weren't. Barney Rosenzweig, the producer and quarterback for the show, had become aware of the stark sexism in film when he was on a date in the mid-1970s with Barbara Corday, whom he would ultimately marry. They saw the original Italian version of the movie Scent of a Woman, and in the conversation that followed, Corday lambasted it for all the stereotypes and assumptions within the plot, within the direction, that marginalized women and perpetuates discrimination. This was 1975, 3 years into the campaign to ratify the ERA and the first years of impact for Title IX. Rosenzweig has put all the stories of Cagney Lacey's development, as well as the highlights and lowlights of his own Hollywood career, into an audiobook, which is available in the 30th anniversary boxed set of the series. He packs a lot into his memoir. With candor, he reveals how that movie date with Corday moved his mindset, and from then on, he was determined to blow open the doors of film and TV for stories and realistic roles for women. Or, as he goes on to tell, Corday came to realize that with the popularity of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, there was no buddy movie that featured women. There was nothing that came close to depicting a positive, supportive, good-natured relationship between 2 women. Barbara Corday is a force in her own right and will indeed be profiled in a future installment of Advanced TV Herstory. At that time, Rosenzweig was a TV producer, not permanently attached to a series. Rather, he stepped into Daniel Boone, a series that ran from 1964 to 1970 and produced many episodes. Also, he brought an eye for feminism and the appropriate, accurate portrayal of women to Charlie's Angels in 1976. Throughout his storytelling, Rosenzweig frames the chasm between shows produced only by men or by men's men as perpetuating the male mythology. Rosenzweig had originally been in the running to produce Charlie's Angels, but hadn't gotten it. However, the position opened up again just as the first episodes were actually going on the air. To hear Rosenzweig tell it, Charlie's Angels was filled with glaringly sexist details and tone, but viewers glommed onto it immediately. His hunch was affirmed not long into the show's run, too, that the audience really did consist primarily of young women who were hungry for shows about women that featured women. His tenure didn't last long, however, but in his memoir, Rosenzweig illustrates a few key changes to production and plot development that took the show to a higher level of control for the women characters. In doing so, the characters of Sabrina, Jill, and Kelly are more believable and stronger in their roles as private detectives. If that sounds subtle or trivial, Rosenzweig recounts these stories with a sense that he was shunned on many occasions for being too critical of the male mythology, that he was forcing change where it wasn't needed. In those days of broadcast TV, the audiences were already technically captured. There was nowhere else to go. There was no competition. For 5 years, he, Barbara Corday, and a seasoned writer whom Rosenzweig asked to team up with Corday, Barbara Avedon, worked to develop the premise for the women's buddy movie that would compare to Newman and Redford. In those years, each was involved in writing, producing, and development work so as to ensure their continued incomes. They pitched and presented iterations of Cagney and Lacey to all the major networks in their spare time. It was at one point a film, a made-for-TV movie, and a series. And each time, the suits were interested, but another project always won out. Here's how Rosenzweig recounts it.
The same thing was holding up American Dream. It was all those Spelling Goldberg commitments and others like them. Rather than be candid about this, the network executives would try to get you into business with one of their open commitments. A secondary position was to stall, to keep having problems with the material, to continue demanding rewrites or other time-consuming changes. Anything to keep from telling you that trade in this industry is indeed restrained and restricted to those in favor, those in the club, those closest to the center. I get it now.
It was finally given the green light in 1980. The pilot was made under the auspices of it being a made-for-TV movie, though many close to it knew that there was enough plot development to make it a successful dramatic episodic series. With a budget of about $2 million, they shot it in Toronto in order to make that budget stretch even further. Now you can imagine that when you've been incubating a breakthrough premise like Cagney and Lacey for as long as these three had, it gives you time to develop a vision. And you know who you want the characters to be played by because they've become more real to you, even though the project itself is stalled. So while the project sat on the shelf, Corday found herself concluding that Sharon Gless was the definitive Christine Cagney. And after a while, Rosenzweig agreed. They had never identified their ideal Mary Beth Lacey, and the Cagney preference, that of Sharon Gless, would come into play once the movie had finally been accepted for production. So Rosenzweig attempted to secure Gless for the role, but she was already committed to the sitcom House Calls, in which she had succeeded Lynn Redgrave as the lead actress. The network sort of gave him an offer he couldn't refuse.
After being rebuffed by Universal talent head Monique James when I had inquired about loan-out possibilities for the services of Sharon Gless, Peter Frankovich of CBS had suggested Loretta Swit as the actress to play Cagney. Swit was a CBS star in her role as Hot Lips on MASH, which was then still one of the network's premier hits. Look, Swit's a great choice, I told Frankovich. She's the right age, the right look, has a good sense of comedy, but she's already committed to a series for you guys. You're blowing me out of the water here. You're killing any chance that this is becoming a backdoor pilot. Barney, came the head-shaking reply. You've already tried to sell this project as a series, and you failed. What you did do is sell it to us as an MOW. That's what it is. That's all it will ever be. We want Loretta Swit. We have a commitment with Loretta Swit, and we're willing to turn that commitment over to you. Unless you can come up with a name we like better than that.
For the role of Mary Beth, Loretta Swit had a say in the decision too, and pushed hard for Tyne Daly.
Oh, only in that I really kind of went to bat for Tyne. I wanted her to, I thought she'd be a good sidekick for Cagney, and she was a friend, and so I really kind of asked for her. I held out for her. They wanted some other people who were wonderful.
Swit put a lot into helping develop the character of Christine Cagney, well beyond the character sketch that had been initially put forth by Avedon and Corday. There's no doubt Swit's homework paid off.
I helped rewrite some of it, actually, some things that after I started to research, I would have liked to put in about her. In fact, Dick O'Neill, who got to play Cagney's father in the series, called me one day and he said, I just found out I have you to thank for my role. And I said, how's that? He said, they told me that you wrote background, the story about her, and you talk about your father and your brothers, and I said, it's true. It's a true story. And he said, well, I love doing it, and she just wasn't as explained enough for the audience for me, and I I said, I want to talk about her background and how she came to be attracted to being a policewoman.
Swit's story lines up with Rosenzweig's about how the director had more interest in understanding the mindset of the villain, who never even had a speaking role, than he did in developing a breakthrough character like Cagney.
I worked with a lady who had served on the force for a long time, and I worked with a rookie. So I had two wonderful different perspectives. I modeled a lot of my character after this policewoman who worked in NYPD, and she had a gun holder on her ankle. She wore one in the back of her trousers, just stuck in, plus the regular gun in a holster, probably here. That's where I wore mine. I can't remember where she wore hers, but I learned all the reasons about that.
When you think about it, holding her legendary role on MASH had to have made Swit feel obligated to deliver as realistic a portrayal as possible. She was doing this for the Sisterhood of Policewomen, which had to have been a pretty small group and highly critical. By the time she had been hired for this role, she had already navigated the swamp of the male domain once before. She put those skills to good use, perhaps better than an actress whose experience had not been so immersed in an all-male military environment show like Hot Lips Houlihan endured on MASH.
And when we were shooting, and I was rehearsing shooting the villain who was coming at me, he was a big man, he was holding something, some kind of club thing. He was coming at me with such force and energy that I knew one shot from my gun was not going to stop him, and that I needed to protect myself more than that. And so we had discussions about this, because at that point in time, you needed to get permission from the network to first of all, I'm the female, I've got a gun, and I'm shooting at somebody. This already is way out there. I told the producers and the director that in order to believe this, if I'm not going to have an elephant gun, I'm going to have to shoot him a couple of times until he falls, because it won't be enough it'll look phony if I shoot him and he falls. And so they went through the whole process and came back, and the network said, you're probably right, and they're going to let you do it. The original script had the cavalry coming in to help her. And I said, okay, but, I've done all the work so far. I get my opportunity to apprehend this man, and I'm right here, and I don't see why I should be rescued. I am not a damsel in distress. They saw my point.
Ultimately, it was Swit who was the first face of Cagney, depicted by far to be more of a groundbreaker than her partner, married with children, Mary Beth Lacey.
If you've said, yes, we're going to do this character, you must let the actor do the character so that it's believable. The opening had me getting into my police uniform at some guy's house where I've spent the night to establish, it was served the story, established her as a single girl who kind of behaved like a guy. She leaves him saying, I'll call you. And this was a big deal, and it was funny. But a police woman would never have her uniform. She would have left that in the locker, and she would be in civilian clothes. So it was a liberty they took, and I told them about it. I said, you're going to get a laugh on that, but it's an expensive laugh. She wouldn't have the uniform, and they said, we're going to, theatrical license, we're going to try to make this work so that we establish her, and you have just so much time to do that establishing. And sure enough, when we ran it for a bunch of women cops, they did laugh. They said, that's wrong, and we know it. We just needed to take that liberty,
Okay, so the pilot, originally framed as a made-for-TV movie, is shot and edited. Again, Rosenzweig, in his memoirs, rants about the many compromises that, at least for this first attempt, resulted in a product that he considered inferior. As a matter of fact, after airing the first cut behind the scenes, Corday was in tears. head in hands. The director had put Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan into a police uniform, brusque and unlikable. This wasn't the Christine Cagney that they had worked so hard to get on the screen.
Cliff Alsberg, who had left ABC and was now a vice president at Filmways under Rosenblum, was inadvertently a big help with his incredibly naive and chauvinistic notes on the screenplay. The young executive unwittingly served two valuable services: a reminder to be ever on the alert for that traditional male mentality that had stymied the project for so long, and secondly, by ignoring the comments and notes from Alsberg and simply moving on, the tone was set for how I would deal with Filmways on creative issues. It was a course from which I never deviated.
The director had little interest in developing the Redford and Newman sort of bond that had been so much a part of the vision. And as I'll describe within the plot, it was shot with so much emphasis on Christine Cagney that the buddy theme really is sort of lost. Once the director had completed his contract, Rosenzweig tells of many long days in the editing room, trying to reorient certain scenes with available footage so as to minimize Cagney's edginess and loop in Lacey, the buddy and partner. So as the movie had originally been presented as too long, it had to be trimmed. And so Rosenzweig delivered notes and said that no scenes should be struck. No, in fact, the editors did not, the director did not strike any scenes, but rather condensed everything. He absorbed every single minute of pause, dialogue chased from one line to the next. And this is where Rosenzweig began incorporating his own approach to storytelling, which is to make use of the moves of the actors and the actresses, use subtle facial expressions or even pauses for effect. No words, a more effective moment in the story and more efficient use of time, Rosenzweig was able to obtain through editing and bringing in a whole lot of footage which otherwise had not initially made it into the show. He worked an awful lot to get this pilot up and running and make it somewhere close to what he and the Barbaras had wanted it to become. And now about the pilot itself. I'm a huge Cagney and Lacey fan for many reasons. Primarily, it's because the show is so significant in the timeline of women characters on television. It represents a handoff of the baton from Charlie's Angels and a long, hard run achieving recognition, breaking new ground in storylines, and just as important, presenting the memorable, genuine chemistry between Sharon Gless and Tyne Daly over the course of the show's run. It took that much power to, in turn, hand the baton to Law & Order SVU. To the 2015 viewer, the 2-hour movie pilot feels like the writers and producers loaded up as much as they could into the plot, hoping that enough of it would appeal to enough viewers to be seen as something bold. Listening to Rosenzweig recount the many years and concessions he committed to in order to get Cagney and Lacey to production, I can appreciate the amount of energy and provocative storytelling Avedon and Corday used to make the splash it would need to become a series. They loaded up the story with a sophisticated, fairly intricate plot that crossed cultural boundaries. As our heroines crossed those boundaries and conducted their work among residents of cultures other than their own, they brought an accessibility, trust, and result that otherwise was unachievable by men. I'd call that novelty. It's been years since Cagney and Lacey reruns aired, and chances are slim that many listeners ever saw the pilot. It is available on Hulu if you subscribe to that service. Unless you own the 30th anniversary box set, like I do, well, I'm here to refresh your memory and tell you how the show improved from this pilot movie. Carryovers from the pilot to the show were Tyne Daly, Al Waxman, who played Lieutenant Bert Samuels, Carl Lumley, who was Detective Marcus Petrie, and Harvey Atkin, who was Sergeant Coleman. He was the desk sergeant throughout the entire series. And as stated earlier, Loretta Swit was cast as Christine. I would expect that this was a bit of a mind meld might have seemed at the time, as Swit really had only been known to audiences as an army nurse in a setting 20 years earlier. Talk about a jump. The character of Harvey Lacey was very different. In addition to being played by a different actor, who was presented as a bit more macho and defensive about the condition for which he could not be employed in the trades, construction to be specific, there wasn't much warmth between him and Mary Beth. Watching this, you'd think they were on the brink of divorce, or that maybe he takes out his anger on her or their sons. There was no Detective LaGuardia, no Detective Victor Hisbecki. When Cagney and Lacey walked into the 14th precinct, the yucks came at their expense. The sexism was palpable, and they seemed incapable of change. From the pilot to the series start, the production team took huge steps forward in terms of character exposition and plot development. The character of Christine Cagney comes across as much more of a hot dog, a one-woman show, than she ever did in the series. And presumably, Rosenzweig's work in trying to mitigate this took an unacceptable product and made it at least palatable. In the end, buddies don't ditch buddies to collar the perp solo. In the first 20 minutes of the pilot, you get to see a lot about the personal lives of the two women police officers. Driving to work in her own car, Mary Beth happens to have picked up Christine en route to work. They are in uniforms when they see a burglar running across the street with pillowcases full of loot. They set off on foot to chase the guy, eventually cornering him on the roof of a building. With guns drawn, there's a certain cat-and-mouse drama that unfolds when Mary Beth looks down into the skylight and spies a heroin operation. They apprehend the suspect on the roof, handcuff him to a drain pipe, and proceed to bust the 10-person heroin operation. Just the two of them. No backup, no communication, nothing. Was this bold? Realistic? I have no idea. It seems a bit ambitious, but it was a moment of suspended belief that was necessary in order for the end result to have had its effect. The huge drug bust earned Mary Beth and Christine the rank of detective. I have to say it is believable that it could have taken an accomplishment of that magnitude, that stature, in order to move women officers up the ranks in 1982. As newly minted detectives, they are out of the uniforms. Their first assignment?
You call this plain clothes?
Well, the John detail is a very important assignment.
With all the crime going down, we gotta trap some horny bastards.
She means it's a victimless crime. Look, we're good cops.
Why do you think you got promoted? Hey, look, that was a terrific color you kids made, like real policemen.
We are real policemen.
And we want off this cleavage detail.
Look, I'm gonna run it down for you. The approach must be explicit. You know what I mean?
Maybe you should spell it out for us, Captain Wells.
Yeah, she's a mother. And I'm not even a married woman yet.
Well, the John must be explicit for the team to make the bust.
Could you give us an example?
Sure. You're standing there looking provocative, you know? That's good, you know, that's very, very good. Then the John comes along and he says, are you busy? And you say no, but then you say to him, what do you want? He says...
He says
something explicit. Oh, you'll know it when you hear it.
While this is no documentary, you get the feeling it couldn't have been too far from the truth. So going undercover as hookers, they become acquainted with the other women on the street. They see and hear about the violence that comes at the hands of the pimps and the feeling of powerlessness. As viewers, we're not quite sure where this is all going, but it had to have been a bit of a novelty to have the call to clear the streets of those women be answered from women detectives with, this is a bigger social problem than getting these women off the streets. While Cagney and Lacey are working undercover with the prostitutes, Detective Samuels is nursing a murder case that is growing colder by the day. A Hasidic Jewish diamond broker was murdered a year ago and a second one just a few days earlier. Diamonds vanish both times. Samuels has nothing to go on, yet is highly territorial about the case. Christine is intrigued by it and stays late one night going through the files related to it. Petrie discovers her and expresses a disapproving stare. The following is a totally believable Cagney and Lacey exchange, this time not in the ladies' room, but rather on the practice range.
Business there in the first place.
What I do on my own time is up to me.
Yeah, well, I wish you'd go back to your old hobby. You're only getting their backs up.
They're not going to give us a chance to prove we can do the job. We're going to have to show them, or we're going to be stuck on that John detail forever.
They're probably just testing us a little. It's natural. We're the first women detectives in the precinct. Can you imagine what Petrie went through?
I guess there are easier ways to get your consciousness raised.
It's their case. They've been working on it for a year. They don't want to hear about it from you.
So I should just keep smiling and taking it. Like you. I bet you smile in your sleep.
Not lately.
Here's how the rest unfolds, and I'm pretty sure this is safe to share because you'd rather have it in 5 minutes than think about sitting through a 2-hour made-for-TV movie, although the fashion is pretty fun. So Chris goes to the recently murdered Jew's home for Shiva. She visits briefly with his wife and learns that both of them had been interned at Auschwitz. Meanwhile, one of the detective's hooker contacts has given them a lot of information about her pimp. Cagney and Lacey need to return to ask their contact, whose name is Famali, that is the word female, or as the woman describes it, my parents had 9 kids and they ran out of names, so they just used the box that they checked. So they ask Famali a few more questions when it's discovered that Sugar the pimp has been knifed in her apartment. Famali describes the John, who she had intended to meet, as an observant older Jewish man. Chris rifles through the apartment looking for clues and finds a vest that quite possibly isn't adorned with rhinestones. They're really diamonds. She goes all out to put together the pieces. Mary Beth goes home to her family for the night, though she has also brought along Famali's son because Famali has been sent off to jail. Famali is considered the #1 suspect in Sugar's death, though Cagney and Lacey do not believe she necessarily did it. Chris combs through the Hasidic Jewish neighborhoods looking for clues. She's determined that the Jewish John killed Sugar because Sugar was too close to Famali. If the Jewish John also killed the 2 diamond guys, why? Chris sends the vest adorned with diamonds to a dry cleaner's for safekeeping. She consults the widow of the first deceased diamond guy. They talk about the Jewish community. They talk about the camps. The widow takes Chris into her confidence, and they go to see a colleague of her husband. Chris gets more intel. Chris probes the widow for some more information. What kind of Jew, an observant Jew, would kill another Jew for diamonds? If the person isn't a real Jew, what sort of person assumes that identity? The widow quakes in her pumps. She shudders and recalls the name Schirmer. Schirmer was a Nazi guard at Auschwitz who all the internees knew climbed into prison garb as the camp was being liberated and assumed a Jewish identity. He escaped discovery during the liberation, and it had long been rumored in the community that he had assimilated right there in New York. Seriously, this is how Cagney and, sort of by association, Lacey earned their stripes in the 14th Precinct detective room. Chris then hunts through the neighborhoods. Schirmer overhears her. He grabs her and puts a knife to her throat, ordering her to drive to the dry cleaner so they can retrieve the vest that has the diamonds on it. This is all during the night. Mary Beth and Harvey are at home having a spat and taking care of Famali's son. Mary Beth gets a call from Chris just moments before Schirmer grabs her. Sensing that Chris is in danger, or at least needs assistance, Mary Beth calls in for backup. She's in for a hard sell to her male colleagues, trying to convince them to believe in Chris's detective work and her instincts. Chris drives the car to the dry cleaners while Schirmer holds a knife to her throat. They break into the dry cleaners, and once in, Chris is able to get away. Once again, that cat and mouse game that, in this particular instance, takes place amongst those rotating hanger contraptions that are mounted near the ceiling, like in dry cleaners. Mary Beth has retraced the clues from Chris's conversation with her, and she remembers the dry cleaners. The rest of the team shows up at the dry cleaners warehouse and descends on Schirmer. But it is Chris, having recovered her revolver, who finally puts 2 shots in him, dead. So let's add up all the big themes in this plot. Women in the police force, hookers and the dangers they risk every day with their pimps, Jews in the garment and diamond districts in New York who had survived the concentration camps, and lastly, the outlier rogue Nazi who is murdering the survivors. As a result of this bust, it would seem, Samuels got promoted to lieutenant, and Chris and Mary Beth were welcomed as equals into the 14th Precinct's detective fraternity. This was crime fighting, clue collecting, and witness interviewing through the eyes of women. Perhaps it was the depth of resolve from Corday and Avedon that cast the plot so strong that even misguided direction couldn't spoil it. From a ratings and interest standpoint, the pilot did its job. CBS picked up the show to begin in fall 1981. At the beginning of this episode, I used the following words to describe the long, arduous effort of getting this show from the germination of an idea, that of creating a women's version of Newman and Redford and Butch Cassidy, to the screen. These are words that likely accompany many who are attempting a big breakthrough in whatever field or industry applies. Resilience, vision, commitment, patience, and moxie. From Rosenzweig's many years of selling the story, to Avedon and Corday developing a script without so much as a guidepost in the form of any other script that previously had been made for a show, to Loretta Swit spending days with women police officers so that she could drop the realistic card when and where she needed to, when the men were asking for something more sexist. This story fits the Hunter S. Thompson quote, "Anything that is worth doing is worth doing right." History was made when so many grew to see that Cagney Lacey was worthwhile on many counts. In a future episode of the Cagney Lacey Chronicles, we'll track the 6 lost episodes, which assigned the role of Chris Cagney to Meg Foster. A lot got ironed out in those shows that ultimately brought us to a more sophisticated, developed show that truly became the runaway hit. Resources for this installment of Advanced TV Herstory include a great interview with Loretta Swit that appears courtesy of the American Archive of Television on YouTube's Emmy Legends channel. Also, Barney Rosenzweig tells all in his memoir, Cagney and Lacey and Me. That audiobook, as well as the pilot, are contained on the 30th anniversary DVD set. Music that you heard in the background is by Jared Ballo, and it is found at freemusicarchive.org. My final thought is this. A year ago, our cable service added the channel Heroes and Icons. It's owned by Weigel Broadcasting of Chicago. Can you think of a show that better fits the category Heroes and Icons? Me neither. The website for Weigel is wciu.com. And lo and behold, a woman named Cheryl Eskin, E-S-K-E-N, is the Director of Strategic Sales and Marketing. Best we all write Ms. Eskin a note and let her know an audience of Cagney and Lacey followers is waiting. This has been Advanced TV Herstory, raising a ruckus and drawing connections on behalf of women in TV. We've got more excellent shows in the hopper, and yes, I am keeping track of all those that I've said we'll cover at some point. And in the meantime, send in your ideas about a show or theme. You can do that by sending an email to advancedtvherstory@gmail.com. That's all one word, advancedtvherstory@gmail.com, or find us on Twitter at TV Herstory. Find this and past scripts at my website, CynthiaBemisAbrams.com. It's my pleasure to be your host. I am Cynthia Bemis Abrams. Thanks for listening.